Welcome, everybody, to the September AMA. And today is about a topic that's usually reserved for college graduates and people that need to cut out lattes. It is on budgeting. And to me, I believe, and what I want to convince you of is that to budget is to be free. It's a source of information, and it's a source of power. So let us dive in. I have, over the years, I've realized that there are two types of spenders. There are what I call the nervous Nellies. You know these people. That's the FIRE community. They track every penny. They reconcile every single expense. They can tell you with precision how much they've spent on any given day. And there is a lot of energy spent to tracking spending. As longtime rad readers, you know, a lot of this is probably driven by a scarcity mindset and a fear that it can all be taken away. Another trait of the nervous Nellies is they delay gratification for a very, very long time. And again, there's no judgment on either of the archetypes. I've been both in my life. The second type is the oblivious ollies. And, you know, if a tree falls and you didn't hear it, it didn't happen. Buttressed, again, speaking to the RadReads community, buttressed by the fact that a lot of these folks are spending less than they earn. So there's safety in that basic math. And it's a form of escapism. It's a form of things will work out. I'm going to work for a long time. I know that I spend less than I earn, and things will be okay. But again, they're missing the joy because there's that nagging sensation that there's a guilt that they're doing something wrong. And so both of these archetypes are missing the same thing: peace of mind. The nervous folk are, you know, the house is about to burn down at any given point in time. And the oblivious are, they know that something is off. And so no one, regardless of which archetype you are, and that's not saying they're the only archetypes, those are the major ones I've encountered, you're still not benefiting from what I call the peace dividend, right? And to use a political analogy, it's not, you know, very cool these days to use political analogies, but, you know, post-World War II, we had the neoliberal world order. And, you know, through coalitions between countries, we basically had a peace dividend. We haven't had a major war. And the result has been a global economic boom for, you know, half a century. And people refer to that as the freedom dividend or the peace dividend. And so to take that analogy, you know, if you're doing these systems, or regardless, you're not capturing that thing that we all want, which is peace of mind. So I had surveyed a handful of rad readers, and I asked them, what does financial independence mean to you? And I gave them three choices, binary, or one. They could only select one. And it was never have to worry about money, work on my own terms, and never lift a finger again. And 37% said that financial independence is never having to worry about money again. I believe that having an understanding of your spending in a way that is healthy and a way that is uplifting and honest and transparent is a gigantic step towards never having to worry about money again. And in fact, the impetus for me to do this is twofold, to do this presentation. The first is that I speak to a lot of people who are very successful professionals. They are scared to know how much they spend each year. They don't want to know. And it just blows my mind that, and they're fine. They're fine, but it blows my mind that they don't want to know. And I know that feeling because I was one of those people for a long time. I didn't start tracking my spending until 3 years after I left my corporate job. So for 3 years, with very little income, I was kind of flailing in the wind, throwing up Hail Marys and just trusting that, you know, the mix of savings and spending would carry me along. Thankfully, it did. But one truth that I'll admit to you guys is what I thought my spending was, once I actually looked at it, the real spending was significantly higher than what I thought it was. And we can come back to that. And so the Oblivious Ollie always has an excuse. And their excuse ranges from, my spending's too lumpy. They have kids. They have all these one-off expenses. They can't just get a picture of their spending. Their income's too lumpy. A lot of entrepreneurs, self-employed folks that don't live on a real paycheck. They're too busy to pay attention. And lastly, I've earned the right to not have to budget. And to that I say, sure, but if you're still worried about money, you're doing something wrong. And then I also asked them, well, what are you so afraid of? And you guys have heard this Jung quote before, which says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And I really think that in these examples, many of these are the people who I coach. There is a tremendous escapism around the underlying fears that they're running from that makes them want to look at their spending. And so things like that could be the relationship they have with money, what their parents think, a conflict between them and their spouse, different values about money. And so by not looking at it, it buries all those questions. And you just trust that spending less than earnings and you move forward. Then there's the nervous Nancy's that are control freaks. And to them, I ask, what is it that you're trying to control? And again, so many of these folks are very successful people, yet they are, making six figures and limiting themselves on how many lattes that they can have. And so what is the disconnect between the two? What are the origins of that lack of confidence? And so what's the cost to this? How does this hold you back? One way I see it all the time, lack of risk taking. When you don't know you're spending, it is harder to take risk. And you see this with people, you see the lack of risk taking with people that are, scared to put money in the market. You see it in people that are not unwilling to take jobs that are lower paying. And of course, you see it with entrepreneurship. Again, I've had so many examples of people that come to me and they say, I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't know. I'm a little bit scared. It's a lot of change and all that. I ask them, how much money do you spend a year? No idea. You should figure that out. Yeah, and then all the litany of excuses that I had mentioned before. It's like, well, and I'm very direct with people. I'm like, what you're telling me is you don't actually want to be an entrepreneur. Because if you really mattered, you would go and take a look at that. And the clarity that has come to my own personal life in knowing with confidence, and my spending is very lumpy, has really empowered me to become a better entrepreneur and to worry less about money. Another way it holds you back, changing careers. We talked about that. And the last thing is that if you always have this nagging self-doubt, this pebble in the shoe, this feeling that, I shouldn't have bought this, or this guilt about buying something, this nagging self-doubt is just a personal blocker to your individual happiness. So I want to rewrite the playbook because, again, budgeting has such a negative connotation, and it's really kind of very reductive to, for being very young and not having, income and things of that nature. Budgeting tends to be about defense. Don't do this, track this, restraint. But I really wanted to think about it from the lens of offense. Like, I want to say I'm confident with the decisions I make. I'm confident in becoming an entrepreneur from a financial perspective. When I buy this home, when I personally pay a premium to live by the beach, but the beach is so important to me and I'm confident that that's the right decision. So I don't have this nagging self-doubt that I've made the wrong decision, and I get to enjoy the thing I paid a premium for, which in my case is to live by the beach. So let's rewrite this playbook together. And I think that just requires a rebranding of this entire conversation. And so we'll go from budgeting to what I'm calling inquiry. This is Peter Drucker. Evan, you'll recognize this slide, but he famously said, what gets measured gets mastered. You track your workouts, chances are you're going to work out more, and you're going to work out more consistently. You look at your spending, and there's a lot of magic that comes out of it, and there's a lot of freedom that comes out of it. And so I want to share with you an approach that I've built and used for myself, and hopefully you can apply it in your own lives. So the approach is basically to track and then to categorize into different tiers. And I call it flex budgeting. And so the first category, so what you do is you'll take your expenses, and I'll show you what systems to use. You take your expenses and you put them into 3 categories. The first is basic. This would be, you could think of it as the base of Maslow's hierarchy. And it's rent, it's groceries, it's car payments, it's education, childcare, healthcare. Things that you kind of need them to survive on a day-to-day basis. You need it to survive and for your family to survive and to thrive. Then the second category would be comfort. And, I think it's comfort. In comfort, I would say it's the things that make your life pleasant and enjoyable and happy. And, this could range from like your Spotify account to your gym memberships to going out to dinner and annual vacation, things of convenience like Uber and DoorDash. If push comes to shove, you don't need that annual vacation, but the annual vacation is actually a part of your healthy day-to-day, how you operate and glide through this world. And then the last category I call bull market buys. And the bull market buys they're luxuries. They're things that are important. They're things that are, that bring additional comfort. They are things that bring happiness. But at the same time, you know yourself well enough that you could do without them, right? So you could do date night, every month. My wife and I, we do a weekly date night on Thursdays, today actually. And we go to like a local restaurant, and we live in kind of a trendy neighborhood. So it's kind of expensive, even if you don't drink. We could also drive 15 minutes and have some of the best Vietnamese food, Japanese food, and Korean food. But we choose to go to the place that's slightly nicer, that's walking distance, and so on. And so I would say, if you think about, that's a very bull market decision to go to the trendy restaurant every week, where we would get the same thing that we wanted, which was personal connection between husband and wife without kids, if we drove 15 minutes and went to kind of the hole in the wall, but still excellent food. And so the system, and again, these are not so crystal clear, right? You could argue that gym memberships are basic, right? Because that's health. But someone else might say, I could do without a gym membership because I run or I do, push-ups at home. Again, this isn't saying to change your life to these standards, but this is saying know how to categorize your different expenses within these different buckets so that the levers that you have at your disposal. And so I want to show you how that plays out in my personal life. So in my kind of nice stuff and bull market buys, there's a lot of travel. We do that annual trip, but we also do a weekend getaway. So those goes. We hire a lot of different coaches, business coach, life coaches, marriage therapists. So again, I wouldn't say that our marriage therapist is a bull market buy, but my business coach is definitely a bull market buy. And then the occasional, we're not consumers of stuff, but every year I'll buy a new surfboard or I'll get a new iPad and things like that. So I know those things, and I know that at the margins, they don't bring me a tremendous amount of like a huge amount of happiness, and I could definitely live without them. And then if you look at our basic comforts, like I said, those are things like takeout food and Ubers, and like one vacation a year. Those are things that, my life starts to feel like it's not full if I have them. But again, what we're talking about here is like scenario planning. Like if the shit hit the fan, like if the shit hit the fan, I don't need to go on an annual vacation. And it would be good to know that is 8% of my annual budget. There is extremely empowering knowledge to know that. And then there's, basic needs like rent, education, childcare, things like that. And even those, now we're getting nitpicky, but, I know that, like I told you guys, I pay a premium to live close to the beach. If the shit hit the fan or if something happened to RadReads, I know that in a year I could even cut my living expenses. I could probably downsize my car and things like that. So that's the general framework of categories, and it really, really helps you. And again, this is the categories laid out in a different way. But now I know that I walk around being like, at any point in time, I could snap my fingers and cut my spending back by a third. I'm not cutting it back by a third because things are going well, market's going well, my work's going well, we're healthy. But I know that if something starts to crack, and I don't know what that crack is, it could be like my parents get ill and I have to, cut back on my work hours to fly to New York to see them. I don't know what that thing is, but I know that if I get stressed on the asset side or on the income side, boom, a third can go right away. That is really, really powerful knowledge to me. And by the way, when I do buy those things, I feel really good about them because I don't have the guilt like, oh, should I be buying them? Now, a few lessons of what it taught me. One is really basic, is that I realized that I actually was paying for a lot of things that didn't make me happy. No, I'm sorry. I was paying for things that I didn't even know I was paying for. So this is like online subscriptions and like random things that your credit card is attached to. Again, it's a couple percentage points, but that was like an easy low-hanging fruit. The second one was there were two big categories that I was spending money on that were not making me happy, and I didn't realize how much I was spending on them. And those two categories were takeout food and Ubers. Living in LA, it's very tempting, and coming from New York where you're not used to driving culture, it's very tempting to take more Ubers because you can work, you can sit back and chill. But I realized that, I actually liked my autonomy of driving my own car. And once I realized that I actually enjoy driving in LA, mostly because I get to listen to my music by myself, I was like, I don't need these Uber purchases, but I needed to see it on paper to make that decision. And takeout, living in New York, being a former banker, I was so ensconced in takeout culture, single guy for a long time, that takeout was my default mode. And I realized how much I was spending on takeout, and I've become slightly more health conscious, as I could save so much money and be healthier and enjoy the food that I cook myself, just with like a few little levers. So again, those were categories that I was spending a lot of money on that weren't bringing me happiness. And then I doubled down on things that did make me comfortable. So I had the confidence to hire a coach. And I'm constantly thinking of hiring new coaches for very specific needs, speaking coaches, marketing coaches, things like that. And coaching is very expensive. I would not have had the confidence to think that that was a justified expense had I not known that I could also remove it quickly if I don't feel good about my current life situation. And then other instances of doubling down for comfort. You guys might have read my different pieces of Trading Time for Money, but like paying for a car service to pick you up from an airport when you have two kids and car seats versus fighting the lift line at an airport. It's like 3 times as much money, but that is a comfort that to me is worth doubling down on. And lastly, and most importantly, the number of fights with my wife went down, because again, if you look at that Jungian quote, when you make the subconscious, until you make the subconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and we'll just call it fate. And, husbands and wives and partners have different utility functions about why they make money, how they want to spend it, what their fears are. And my wife thinks in those 3 categories. She doesn't quote them with the surgical precision that I can, but she knows we could cut a third and she's on board. Her third, there's stuff in her third, and there's her stuff in that third, and there's my stuff in that third. And that honestly has been the biggest boost to all this. Now I'm going to pair this, and this is just an excerpt from the financial independence class, but I basically walk around all the time with 2 numbers in my head. What percentage of my spending can I cut at any point in time? And what would happen if the market fell by 50%? And I call that my break glass scenario. And so those two numbers, with those two numbers in my, those are like, that's like the world's coming to an end number for me, numbers. And I could basically know that if the world were to come to an end, you would wake up, you'd have this much annual spending, you would have this much in your bank account. How would you feel? And I managed to that. And when I run that analysis for myself, the answer is I feel fine. I don't feel happy, but I feel completely fine, which means today I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And so some of these, again, these are from the financial independence class, but it's basically at the highest level, you just put in your portfolio, you take a bear market. I use 50%, Lehman Brothers. I lived through it. I was trading, I was investing during it. And then you just approximate how much of, you know, so you have 70% in equities, then you wake up 50% down, you've lost 35% of your assets. So how do you feel if you wake up, you've lost 35% of your assets and you could cut your spending by a third? Those are numbers that let me live and play from a point of strength every day. 2 more slides. So how do you get started? I think there's a variety of different approaches. I would say that I'm anti-mint because the one thing that this approach does need is it requires you to do some categorization of expenses, and it needs you to do categorization that might not be intuitive, or that might require slightly more granularity. For example, I take my normal Ubers over the course of the day or the month. You know, they're 15, 20 bucks here and there. When we travel, there's like 8 Ubers that are $200 or that are like to the airport and an XL and all that stuff. That, to me, in my system, is an expense related to vacation. It's not part of the daily Uber expense pool. Same with Amazon, right? Amazon, if I buy a surfboard on Amazon, it's not going in the Amazon bucket, it's going in the K luxury bucket. And then all the other books and, you know, toilet paper and so on is going into the groceries bucket. It's really, really easy to do that with both Tiller and YNAB. And so you can't, it's very difficult to do that with Mint as a warning, because Mint will always say Uber is this category. And it's very hard to change the categories, and it's hard for them to remember it, and they just don't make it easy to manipulate them. So Tiller is basically links your bank accounts to a Google Sheet, basically. And so you can run, if you're a spreadsheet savvy, you can tag, run whatever filters you want yourself. I love YNAB. It's super clean. It has an inbox. Every morning you wake up, it grabs your transactions from the previous day, and you just spend literally 1 minute just tagging them. I mean, there's going to be like 6 a day. And YNAB is smart. It always, you know, if you go to Starbucks, and you treat Starbucks as coffee, well, it always treats Starbucks as coffee unless you need to change it. And then lastly, if you don't want to pay for a solution, you can just export your transactions from your credit cards and your bank accounts into a CSV and basically do what Tiller does. So those are 3 options. Create your categories. Start with less categories at first. I think 10%. If a category clears 10%, it's probably worth a threshold. Again, a little bit finger over the wind. It's better to have less categories and keep it manageable than to have too many categories and it just becomes overwhelming. And if you want to talk categories, there's a lot of resources on the internet about categories and on RadReads as well. And then you aggregate and then filter the transactions. I then, at the end of each month, you know, YNAB paints a very, very crystal clear picture of my spending every month. And so I just, super simple, I grab it, a screenshot of the pie chart, and I send an email to my wife just so she knows. And I put 5 bullet points of the top 5 transactions, the top 5 non-recurring transactions, just so we have awareness as to what they were. It's done. All this takes a couple minutes. I mean, there's a little bit of setup time, an hour or 2. But in terms of like day to day, it's like easily under 5 minutes. And there you have it. That's it. I thank you. And with that, I will open it up to questions. Let me just unshare my screen. All right.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So I use YNAB. I love it. Question: do you map those categories that you kind of used in your like the bull market necessities? Do you use that in YNAB?
So I've been doing it for so long that I don't actually have to tie them one for one. So for example, like I have wellness as a category, and that is, you know, having a masseuse come to our house. That's my wife's, different spa treatments, like things like that. I don't technically put them in a category called bull market buys, but it's so ingrained in my head at that point. What I do though is that I do split the transactions to make sure that they fall in the right place. So again, the Uber example, the $150 Uber to the airport is vacation. The $20 Uber for a meeting is, weekly Uber. So,
Okay.
But it would be very, very easy to do that. And what I would do if I was to do it more scientifically is I would create you basically group it, right? So you could group it into those three buckets.
Mm-hmm.
And then even if you have like double transactions, right? You could have like in my head, one thing I've been thinking about doing is, because we take one big trip that I know I should accrue for over the course of the year. It's very expensive. And then we take a lot of weekend getaways. I should turn those into two separate vacation categories. I don't do that yet. And like, that's something that would bring it more into line with the way that I'm thinking about it.
And then do you do a look back every month to do those percentages?
I just eyeball it because YNAB the pie chart will give you the percentages. And so, it's like if I add, my wellness, my discretionary, and my vacation category together, I've basically figured out what my 33% is.
I'm sorry. And then one more question. Sorry.
No, go for it.
How often do you send that email to your wife? I think that's a good way to stay in communication, and finances with your partner is always not fun.
Every month. The question is, does she read it? Is a completely different one. No, but we do, we talk about that. We talk about it I think the better power is talking about it using the same language, because it then feels real to her, versus my wife is a very non-financial person. And so the difference between 30 and 50%, like, when it comes to, it's like, it registers, but it doesn't like fully register. And so when we can ascribe specific categories, and then there's specific buckets, and then we have, we could talk about like, the flights for this vacation ended up being way more than we thought, or this unexpected school expense. Someone just told me, like, we were in the public school system, and someone was like, there's an unwritten rule that you need to donate $2,100. I'm like, oh, that wasn't in the budget. So you see those like one-time expenses, and to be honest, this was why I kept undershooting my budget, is that there's a lot of one-time expenses every month. When you have two kids, you work for yourself, you move around a lot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a quick question. Outside of kind of what you talked about, I'm wondering, at the top of the funnel, do you allocate sort of mechanically money that's coming in to things that you're going to use for coaching or for childcare or those other necessities? Are you saving those up for those lumpier payments, or are you just dealing with it out of one big pile?
So it's a great question. It's a bit of both. So what I mean by that is I don't really budget, because budgeting implies that there's a constraint. And once you hit the constraint, if you hit your eating out constraint, then you stop eating out. And having worked for 20 years, being 40 and self-sufficient, like I personally have earned the right for myself to not have to budget, but I want to be smart. And so so none of these, so there's no allocation of I mean, there is an allocation, but it's not, I don't feel the pressure to stick to it. It's more expressive than restrictive, if that makes sense. But there are a few very big expenses in our life on an annual basis. There's the annual trip. There is tax. Oh, tax and not accruing for taxes, but tax preparation, accounting, and what's the last life insurance premiums, insurance premiums that are very lumpy. We used to be in the private school system, so there were these like gigantic lumpy private school payments, and then the last one, there are a few conferences that I go to that are pretty expensive. And so I accrue, that's the cool thing about YNAB that I don't think you could do in Tiller, is that you could basically accrue those accounts. And I do accrue to the summer trip account. I do accrue to the conferences account, and I do accrue to the life insurance premiums account. I don't for coaching. I treat those a little bit more as like luxury, kind of like more one-off luxury purchases. Cool.
Okay, question. Are you allocating a certain percentage to savings?
It's a good question. My income's so volatile. So the answer is sort of. And what I mean by that is that let me be direct. I'm in a negative cash flow position. So I'm funding my life with savings at the moment. So that's why I'm demurring in that I am not allocating money to savings because I haven't crossed profitability. But I'm saving in the sense that I have savings in cash that are funding RadReads, and as my RadReads income grows, I am being more aggressive with my cash from an investing perspective, if that makes sense. But it's not formulaic, and I'm probably K today is probably not the right benchmark for saving, in that like negative cash flow, super volatile income, and also decent amount of savings to date. So I kind of play in that gray space. And I'll answer that also with like a little bit more of a philosophical question, if I may. And that philosophical question is, I love working. And so I have no plans to not work. And I happen to, and again, I'm touching wood, but I believe that the things I like working on are most likely income generative in the long run. And so I don't feel the pressure like I said, I have savings. I am tracking for my kids' college educations, for example. I'm completely on track for that. But in terms of like saving for retirement and things like that, again, I have savings, but I'm just excited to keep, as long as I can control my time, I'm excited to just continue to work, and I could see myself wanting to be a university professor if they take me, in my 50s, and doing nonprofit work, and in the next 5, so it's again, It's probably not the most scientific answer, and maybe not the answer that's the most applicable to a wide swath of people. But that's a philosophical view that I have on savings. Also, with my spending, I also know, like, now that I know what my spending is with like a pretty high degree of certainty, I know where my income is going. And so I think implicitly I have an understanding of what my savings will be.
And I think tied in with that topic, Kay, I'm curious. So you mentioned, what gets measured gets mastered, and then you have those two numbers of the flex spending that makes you feel more free. On the other side of that equation, the value of your time, do you also have some sort of shorthand visual that you keep to sort of reassure yourself that you should be, investing in worthwhile activities given your time?
Well, that's a good question.
And like your Excel sheet does it, but I'm curious if you have that output also in your head.
You guys are asking really good questions that my answers might be interesting, but they might not be as applicable. But let me just, because my life situation is so out there, let me try to answer that. I'm going to answer it philosophically because I think that's the only way I can. I have a sense of what my time is worth per hour because there are many engagements where I charge per hour. It doesn't mean that I could just like quadruple that and make 4 times as much money, but I have a sense of the value of my time. I actually try to throw that concept out the window as frequently as I can. And Paul Graham has this essay that says, do things that don't scale. I think that the equalizing or the equating of time and money is a source of a lot of our anxieties. And so again, if I know that I'm good, right? Like I see an income trajectory. I see a spending trajectory. I have a sense of what can go wrong. I also have a sense of what can go right. And I try to just manage to that, because if I start to really think about the value of my time, there's so many things that I would not do. And in fact, a personal shift that has taken place with RadReads has been that I have been more focused on doing things that don't scale. And I think it's made RadReads better, but it's like from an economic perspective, it doesn't make sense. So I write handwritten notes to people who donate to RadReads. That does not scale, but it's a very important thing to me. And again, in any metric, I tell people I do that, they're like, you're fucking crazy. Like, why would you do that? But you guys have been on the receiving end of these and you get it. And more importantly, if you just remove the economics from it, like it brings me joy to do that. So I try to be careful to not equate money for time, because so many things that I do would fall off, I'd stop doing them if I started to think that way.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? I know that's like a little squishy.
It does definitely. Thank you.
I like the squishy answers.
I talk squishy often.
Yeah, the existential stuff. I like it. Hey, I have a question here. So I'm kind of like in between the Oblivious Ollie and Nelly. More so Oblivious Ollie, I think. So my question is about savings. So I'm also an entrepreneur. I kind of like teeter between like part-time jobs, full-time jobs, back out hunting, trying to, get something to pop off. I don't have, I'm fortunate I don't have any debt, but also don't have any savings. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of like Oblivious Ollie in the sense like, as long as my expenses are super low, they mirror a lot of your values as well. But in the part of me that gives me no, like, some lack of peace of mind is the area of savings. Because like I'm kind of like just thinking, you know, like I'm 30. In the next 20 years, if something pops off, then I'll be good. Which is not exactly. It's definitely a Hail Mary, but I'm wondering like what should like what to do about savings? Like how much should be set aside? What's your take on that?
It's a really good question, and I'll share in the notes. There's this amazing flow chart that kind of answers this question. Again, it's a very personal question, and but I would say the number one starting point would be to save to have an emergency fund. And, you know, people use 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Again, if you're a family, you know, sole breadwinner, a family of 4, or a single 30-year-old guy, I'm not inferring that you're a single, then that might be different. If you live close to your parents, it might be 3 months. If, you know, if you are in a city with no friends, no family, no acquaintances, it might be closer to 8. But again, that would absolutely, you know, be the starting point. And in fact, I would say, you know, I would probably flex the other way on this, is to cut out, you know, cut out the luxury stuff, cut out maybe even some of the comfort things to get to that number as soon as possible. Because that is really like, that is, and again, if you can go and move into your parents' house, if something like that were to happen, then you probably don't need to be as concerned about it. But I think that for the peace of mind of just, you know, something happens, I don't get a job for 3 months, or some unexpected medical expense, that would be the starting point. Then the next thing, you know, then it starts to get into like some of your bigger values about money and how you see your life moving forward, right? What standard financial advice would tell you would be maximize your tax. If you had an employer, it would be maximize your 401k so that you get the match from your employer. If you're self-employed, it would be maximize all your tax deferred vehicles, Roth IRAs, Roth IRAs. If you have kids, 529 plans. Money growing tax-free is significantly, especially over long periods of time, is significantly better than money growing in taxable rates. And these things get capped out as your income grows. So there's the extra bonuses if you are still eligible for them, to start putting those in. Again, I wouldn't say cut out the luxury, you know, cut yourself to your budget to the bare bones to do that. But again, it depends on how you view your retirement, right? Most of these savings accounts are for retirement or for your kids' college education. And then, you know, there's a question of, you know, what increases do you want in your lifestyle, or what significant purchases do you have on the horizon? And again, the classic one for most people is buying a home. So, you know, again, there's a trade-off. Like, do you want to take luxury today and put off the home purchase, or do you want to cut out luxury today and be closer to the home purchase? Again, these are going to be personal decisions. There's other questions that I think personal finance doesn't talk as much about is, do you want to take a few years off of work, right? Do you want to take a year off? Do you want to take a sabbatical? I would encourage, there are a lot of people who are making good incomes who are unhappy in their work, you know, in the world, but also in the RadReads community. And what I would encourage them to do is basically the same way you would save money for a down payment for a house, save money to basically fund a career change. That's effectively what I did. I funded my entrepreneurship with my savings. But that could be much less risky. It could be funding, going from a high-paying corporate job to a startup and funding the difference with savings, right? And again, this YNAB helps with all this stuff, because you can say like, okay, I want to take a $20,000 pay cut. And so how can I save $20,000 to not have a change in my lifestyle, right? You can you would actually budget, you would set goals, you would use the accruals and so on. So that would be another approach that I would take. And then lastly, I would say just anytime you have skin in the game, you care more. And so I would say, even with the smallest amount, $10 a month, 150, I don't know what the minimums are at these different accounts, just start, because you got skin in the game. You're going to pay more attention. You're going to see like, oh, I put in $50 a month for a year and I should have had $600, but I actually have like $750. Like, oh, that's kind of cool. And I didn't pay any taxes on this. That's very different than if I had left that money in a savings account. Like you'll notice these things. And, like any good habit, it's the earlier you start a good habit, the more compounding benefits it has, and the higher likelihood that it will stick.
Okay. Got a few action items here.
Definitely, though, the emergency fund.
Yeah, I was just reviewing my YNAB reports which I haven't looked at too much, but I'd like to. And yeah, I guess I would go about maybe multiply my basics, needs, and comforts by 12, and that should be like a good starting point if I want a 12-month runway.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, even like take gym membership. That's an easy one, right? Like that, everyone wants to pay for a gym membership, but if you're at the point in your life when you need to tap into your emergency fund, you're probably not paying for the gym.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thanks, Kay.
Yeah.
So for Kay and maybe even for Evan, I'm curious if you think about the like business expenses differently, and if they're like a different budget or anything like that in YNAB.
Oh man, you're looking through my soul, Brian. So I'm just like chock full of cop-out answers today, because RadReads isn't profitable. So RadReads expenses are actually very, very, very low in the grand scheme of things. So right now, and I file just on a look-through basis on my taxes, so I don't. I'm probably crossing over into profitability next year. I just need to be a big kid, a grown-up about this type of stuff on the RadRead side. So I'm probably going to seriously carve it out. I probably won't keep it in YNAB. I'll be very strict about using my business card for my business expenses, whereas now like everything's a networking meeting, so the plan, I'm not doing it yet. Next year, I probably will. And then I probably will then start looking at more advanced tax strategies. I know we've talked about it in the Facebook group of like filing as an S Corp, things like that, again, high class problems. But that's my answer, Brian.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing like, I am tracking it separately, but it's still like, I'm still just a sole proprietor. So for taxes and stuff, it's still all kind of combined basically. And,
there's a lot of tax advantages to being a sole proprietor. So makes sense.
Is it, that might be a bigger question, but when you have an LLC or a sole proprietor, then I understand there are a lot of tax benefits. Like, I think I have friends that write off like everything.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't started playing that game, but is that a game to be played? And is that more advantageous than like, let's say, I'll leave it at that.
I would just say that there are guidelines, and if you document what you're doing, and you can stay within the guidelines, and there can be tax advantages. I'm not a tax accountant. This is not advice. Standard disclaimers apply.
Yeah, and I've done a little bit of research about it. And at least like as far as an LLC is like not a like taxable entity. So you file either as like an S corp or as a sole proprietor, regardless of if you're an LLC or not. But I mean, it seems like at least as far as things that are deductible, it should be like mostly the same. It's just a matter of if you're actually like paying yourself from a corporation. But yeah, like Kay said, basically like talk to an accountant.
Okay.
I'm like, I deduct like courses and like my email service provider and like all of that stuff. But like, that's it. I'm like super conservative about like what I actually like deduct as a business expense. Just because like I don't have an accountant to tell me exactly like how to do all of that stuff. So I only deduct the stuff that I know 100% is like 100% of business expense.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Brian.
And
Yeah, no problem.
there's a lot of rules. I mean, the IRS is maybe conscientious, opaque, intentionally opaque. But there's rules like if you're driving to a meeting, if you track the miles, you could use a standard gas mileage rate that they provide, but you got to track the miles. And then you would have to prove, if audited, that trip was a business meeting. That's like one example.
All right. Tax is definitely a different conversation. A lot of stuff there to unpack.
Awesome. Anything else? Any other just broader RadReads questions or, ruminations?
Kay, in your course, you suggested that, or offered for consideration using like one credit card instead of several, in spite of, not reaping the benefits of having like, more cards. I saw it in one of your like proposed ideas to simplifying your life or something. It was one of the spreadsheets. Is that something that you do yourself, or do you carry multiple credit cards?
Yeah, I found
that as an interesting idea. I have 3 right now. It's not unmanageable, but I could see there being some peace of mind by having just one card for everything.
I have 2 cards, basically business and personal. One thing I don't do is I don't do like travel hacking and things like that. So the ROI of those things, like, use this one card to buy gas and use this other card to buy, digital services. Like, I don't do that. I don't play the travel game. It's the ROI. I don't find it fun. Some people like the chase of that. I'm just not interested in it. One thing that I do is that if there's a bonus of over $200, I will sign up for a credit card and then cancel it. So that is one thing that I do. And actually the reason why I feel comfortable doing that is because of 2 apps that I have. One is OmniFocus. So, if you miss a payment on a random credit card, it's going to eat up your bonus. So I know exactly when to close the accounts. And then the second is, what's the second app that gives me the comfort to do that? Shoot, I'm forgetting the second reason why. But so I'll do that. But even then, it's starting to be like, what's the point? I do think that there's a lot. Minimizing your cognitive overhead is a very, very valuable thing. And so to the extent that you can parse things out, I think it's very, very valuable. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, I like that principle, the idea of minimizing cognitive overload.
Yeah, and I try to do that in every element of my life. Digitally, I do that a lot too.
Okay, thanks, Kay.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna send some of these follow-ups, But one question I'm going to put to vote the next topic. So if people on the line have any quick thoughts, so I have 3 ideas for October's AMA. The first one is that I will have just finished my class on Notion. And so we did there was a digital product launch AMA, I think 2 months ago, or maybe last month. This one's going to be way more organized. And so I could go through the inner workings of the course. That's one idea. The second idea, I see this, these are some of the most popular clicked RadReads links, is how to create good looking presentations. That would be a second topic. And then the third topic would be how to, networking strategies, how to become a better networker. I don't know. I'm going to put it to a poll, but if someone feels strongly, for or against one, you guys are regulars, so you guys have much higher weighting in the decision.
Did you already talk about Notion a few times already, or maybe in another? I know you mentioned it a few times.
Yeah, I haven't done an AMA on Notion itself. I talked about it in the first one, which was like a productivity tools one.
I guess out of all those, I feel, this is just me, but I feel resonant on the 132 is my order. So launching a product, yeah,
networking, and then presentations.
Yeah,
okay.
That's just for me.
Yeah, I would say that probably lines up with me pretty closely too. I also think doing something specifically on Notion, from a business standpoint, obviously it makes sense too, if as kind of a lead into the course. But it's obviously something that people already kind of want to know about.
True. Yeah, I guess it's funny because in my mind I'm I'm bombarding you guys with Notion stuff. That's to do another one, but at the same time, it's such a big and fragmented audience that what may seem from my perspective as bombardment might be just oh, you write about it occasionally.
Yeah, I don't know if you follow Jason Zook.
I don't.
He does a lot of business stuff, but he had a tweet the other week that was basically he tweeted about he's kind of advertising his new book, and it's yeah, I sent out 3 emails and 30 tweets and 10 blog posts, and then I get an email oh, hey, I didn't hear about this. So yeah, I totally get that side of it for sure.
Totally. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you, gang, as usual. Thank you for your support. You guys are the best.
Thank you.
And any questions, I'll be sending around the replay in the next hour. See you guys in Slack.
Thanks,
Cool.
everyone.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.